guys, and welcome back to my channel. I know, long time no see, but I was in a play very recently and just didn't realize how much of my time that would take up, and I literally haven't had any time to even think about anything other than that play until right now. So I'm very excited to be back and talking about my October TBR and watchlist with you. So obviously, as a horror fan, October is one of my favorite months of the year when I get to really indulge in everything horror. It seems like that's when all the horror books and the horror movies come out this time of year. So I'm super excited to be able to talk about what I like to rewatch and what I plan to watch for the first time and what I plan to read for the first time this October. So I want to start off with my TBR list, and I have 5 books that I'm hopefully going to finish by the end of October. So the first one is Ghost Station by S.A. Barnes, which I have literally been reading for the past month and a half. I only have 50 pages left in this book, and I think that I've been trying to finish those 50 pages for the past 3 weeks now. So the end is in sight. I'm hoping that when we go to Louisville this weekend that I'm able to finally finish this book. This is S.A. Barnes' second sci-fi horror book after Dead Silence, which I enjoyed a lot. And in this one, a team of scavengers, you could say, goes to this abandoned planet and tries to survive for 6 weeks, and things, as they always do, go horribly wrong. I'm so close to finishing this book. I don't think that I love it. I think it's probably gonna be, I don't hate it, I just kind of wish that it would have moved along a little faster. There were lots of fake outs in this book that I did not enjoy, and now that I'm so close to the end, I'm really excited to see what the payoff is, but I'm cautiously optimistic. I don't think that this is going to suddenly be a 5-star read for me in these last 50 pages or so, but it is one that I'm hoping to finish by the end of October. Next up is Man, Fuck This House by Brian Assman. I kind of picked it up on a whim, mostly because it is super short. It is exactly 200 pages. And because I've fallen behind on my reading goals, I'm looking for a couple really short books to kind of get me back on the right track. And this obviously meets that mark. I definitely don't know how to describe this book, but I feel like it leans a little bit more into absurdist comedy, which I think will be kind of refreshing in the month of October. I love horror, all types of horror. Horror comedy is definitely not one that I read regularly, so not only do I think it'll kind of shake up my own reading style, but it's also not one that you would expect to read in the spookiest month of the year. So I'm excited to not only catch up on my reading goals with this, but also kind of venture out into a subgenre I'm not super familiar with. Next up is a classic, and it's Hell House by Richard Mason. Basically, in this book, they head to Hell House to investigate whether or not ghosts are real. Very similar to another book on this list that I'm going to talk to you about. I think that I've read this one before in college, but I don't really remember. This is pretty much a classic every time I look up haunted house horror books, so I am excited to give it a read. I'm unsure if I've actually already read this book before or not, which is why I'm kind of hesitant to say that, because it's very possible I'll get a couple pages in and be like, yeah, I've read this, I can move on. But if not, this promises to be a pretty good one. Next is my book of the month pick for September or October, and it's Mad Woman by Chelsea Beaker. A gripping story of motherhood, mother loss, and the brutal, mighty things women do to keep themselves and each other alive. I actually don't think that this is technically a horror book, or at least it's not sold that way, but it does teeter on that literary horror edge from what I understand. This book is on the shorter side. It's just over 300 pages, which again, I'm trying to catch up on my reading goals this year, so I did choose some shorter books to read in October so I can kind of get myself back on track again. But this one has been on my TBR shelf for a little bit now, and I'd like to move on. I think the cover itself is so interesting and intriguing, so I'm excited to learn more and read about this. I think this is super aesthetic regardless, so I'm excited to see what this book actually is going to hold. And then last but not least, I think I would like to reread The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. Fun fact, I do not actually own this book, so I would need to check it out from one of the libraries, but I just talk about it so much, and I think it's been a year or two since I've actually read it, and I feel like right now would be the perfect time of year for it. Not only does it take place in the fall in the actual novel, but it just is such a classic haunted house story, which is my favorite subgenre of horror, even though I don't actually end up reading that much of it. I do love a good old-fashioned haunted house, which means that The Haunting of Hill House is perfect for this time of year and for my niche interests. Now to move on to my watch list, I have a couple of films that I like to rewatch every October to kind of get me in the Halloween spirit, and there's a couple of new releases this year that I'd like to check out this time of year. So I divided my rewatch list into 3 categories. Timeless classics that everyone knows and loves, family and children movies that kind of just make me happy and a little bit nostalgic, and then actually scary movies. So to start off with the timeless classic, most of these are 80s movies, but I have Beetlejuice, Ghostbusters, and Child's Play. I absolutely love Beetlejuice, and I actually have already rewatched this one before I went and saw Beetlejuice 2, which I also very much enjoyed. There's just something about Beetlejuice that I just cannot get enough of. Every time I watch that movie, I get it more and more every time. I pick up on new jokes, on new minor details that I didn't notice before, and it just makes my rewatch worth it. That's the kind of movie that I think is so worth rewatching, where every time you rewatch it, there's something new for you to enjoy and to explore. And I think that Beetlejuice, in my experience, does this very perfectly. And obviously it's timely as the sequel has just been released. Next up is Ghostbusters. I have a lot of horror comedies in this rewatch section. While I don't read a lot of horror comedies, I think that is my favorite subgenre of horror movies. So my next one is Ghostbusters. Very classic, no explanation there. I just think that it's such a fun movie to rewatch, put on in the background for me, get me in the Halloween spirit. Ghostbusters is just one that I like to always rewatch. And then the last one, a new addition to my rewatch list, is Child's Play. I think this is what Tyler and I are going as for Halloween this year, so I think it would be super fun for us to check out the movie before we actually get dressed up as the characters for it. So not one that I'm usually watching, but I think this year in particular, I think it deserves a rewatch. Now to move into my classic childhood section, I use the word classic lightly because many of these movies are from the 2010s, which is definitely not classic by any means, but for me they just represent movies that I watched in my childhood, or movies that are just very synonymous with childhood, I guess. So the first one that Tyler and I both love to watch and rewatch every year is Corpse Bride. We both love this movie separately, so now it's kind of been added to our couple rewatch in October every year. I fell in love with this movie, I think, in high school. I remember watching it for the first time though, and actually being terrified as a child of it. But as I've gotten older, I've started to love and appreciate it for what it is. Again, just a light-hearted movie, you could say, that's fun to put on in the month of October. Next up is my favorite one to rewatch. I absolutely love this movie, and I wish that I saw more people in my real life talking about it, and that is Paranorman. I do not have enough nice things to say about this. I could speak for eternity about how incredible that this movie is and how I truly think that every horror fan, every person ever really, should give this movie a watch. I, again, remember that first time that I saw it and got to the twist ending and just bawled. It just works so well for me, and I think that the message of this story is really beautiful, you could say, and impactful, and definitely not a message that I've ever seen in a story really before. I don't want to give spoilers for it, but the messaging of the story is absolutely incredible on multiple levels, and for that alone, I think it's worth the rewatch. I don't know, I love this movie. Moving on to probably my second favorite rewatch of the month is Coraline. Again, another movie I was scared of the first time I saw it when I was a child, but one that as I've grown up, I've come to appreciate the kind of weird quirkiness in it. I just love this movie. I think that Neil Gaiman does a really great job with it, and the fact that it is a really smart movie for children, I appreciate, I think probably a lot more as an adult than I did as a child, which makes it perfect for me to rewatch. Most of my rewatches do kind of fall into this classic childhood category, because I think that a lot of them do have these really appealing elements to adults, and I think that Coraline is probably the perfect example of that. And then the last one that is also new to the rewatch list this year is Monster House. Tyler actually wasn't sure if he'd ever seen this before, so it's a rewatch for me and a first time watch for him. I don't love this one. I could get rid of it easily off of this list if I wanted to, but it kind of fits into this classic childhood category, and I did rewatch it already this year, so I kind of wanted to include it on the list. And I know that this is also a very popular one for many people my age, so I know that I am in the minority opinion about this film, but I gave it the rewatch. I added it to my list, so what else can you ask for? And And then the last one, also one of the shortest categories on here, are actually scary movies. I only have 3 that I want to rewatch this year, and all of those are also kind of from my like preteen age, like when you first watch your first real scary movie. Not one that like you watched when you were probably a little bit too young, but right at the beginning stages of like when you start to become a horror fan, probably for me at about like 12, 13. And for me, that's The Conjuring and Insidious. I actually do not think that I have rewatched these since they first came out, maybe once or twice, but beyond that, like I usually say that The Conjuring is probably one of my most stereotypical, I guess, horror movie favorites if I have to pick a very mainstream answer. But I really don't think that I've rewatched this film that many times, which is why I put it on my October watch list so that I can kind of return to these films that really made me a horror fan in the first place. And then the last one that I want to rewatch is a television series, and you probably guessed it. It's The Haunting of Hill House. I know this is on many people's rewatch list for October, and I don't think that I have ever rewatched it, which is crazy because it's absolutely incredible, but it is kind of a commitment. Obviously, it's 9 or 10 episodes, all about 60 minutes long, so I'm not sure if I'm actually going to be able to get to this one, but in my dream world, I am watching The Haunting of Hill House this October. And then I also have a small category of movies that are coming out this October that I am excited to see. The first one is Salem's Lot, which is a Stephen King adaptation. An author returns to his childhood home to discover that it has been overtaken by vampires. Now, I know that this one isn't doing too well on Rotten Tomatoes or Letterboxd right now, but I think the trailer still really hooks me in. It looks like a really scary movie, and that's really not something that I say about vampire movies. That's just not my niche. It's not something that I am thrilled by, you could say. So I'm actually kind of surprised that this is on my list, even though it's doing pretty poorly, but I think that it's worth the watch and I want to check it out. But this is on, I believe, HBO Max, so what is it really costing me? 2 hours of my life? I might as well give it a watch. The next one I haven't seen a ton of people talk about, and that is Mr. Crockett. In this one, a mother embarks on a perilous quest to rescue her son from a demonic children's show host who is kidnapping kids. Now, the reason that this one interests me the most is because it reminds me of a couple of books that I've read recently or different movies that I think are very similar to this one, yet somehow also very different. Actually, it reminds me of Mr. Magic by Kirsten White. For some reason, it also kind of reminds me of Skinamarink, but I think that's just because, like, television. I don't think that's actually a really good comparison, but I liked Skinamarink, and I hope I like this one. So I think I'm more just interested in the overall premise of this, and not necessarily because the trailer makes me excited or that I've heard good things. I'm more just very interested in the concept. I do have a hard time believing that a fictional children's TV show host is going to scare me, but there's probably more going on to this. But there's probably more going on in this movie than meets the eye, if I had to guess, just based on a couple snippets of the trailer. So maybe it'll do something for me, maybe it won't, but I do want to go ahead and check it out, basically for the same reason. It's on Hulu. What's the worst that could happen? And then the last one that I'm actually super excited about is Smile 2. Now, I do not think this is a direct sequel to the first Smile, but the first Smile I saw in theaters. I, to this day, would argue it's the scariest movie I've ever seen in theaters. So scary that in the middle of Smile, I almost needed to excuse myself from the movie because I thought that I was going to have a panic attack. I know that for those of you who probably watched it at home, it's not that terrifying, but watching it in theaters was just such a whole different experience that I am truly never going to forget. So I have high hopes, I guess, that Smile 2 will do the same thing for me. Not that I want to be scared that badly again, but obviously it must be doing something right as a horror movie if it's able to elicit that reaction from me. So not really sure what I'm going to get out of this one, if it's going to live up to Smile 1. It was turned around really quickly. Smile only came out in 2022. So I am a little bit worried that this, I don't think it's a cash grab, but a little bit of like a, let's just get one out and see how it does. This first one worked really well, and so let's see how this performs. So I'm a little bit worried that not as much thought went into this one as it did into the first one, but I want to check it out. And it's the only movie on this list that's going to cost me any money, so I think that's worth the chance. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know in the comments below what is on your October TBR or your watch list. What are those films or those books or those TV shows that you look forward to rereading or rewatching every October? And I will see you next time.